Alright, so this is going to be the first of, I believe, probably two constraint videos that we're going to do, or control videos that we're going to do. So we can see here that I have my base controls, and I've got to move them out of the way, and I just set them to -10. This is just so I don't accidentally select them while I'm trying to select my character or select controls that controls that I'm putting on her. So these are out of the way. You'll see that the objects inside, though, are still, the transformations are frozen. Once I move them out of this group, which I will be doing each time that I make a new one, then the translate will get set to -10, and I'll just set that back to 0. So basically, all that we're doing here with our control objects we are creating a connection between one of these three shapes, duplicates again of these shapes, and a connection between that and our rig, because ultimately we want our animators to open up this model and they don't see the rig, they don't see the skeleton, they just see the character with a couple of objects that they select and manipulate. And you've seen examples of this already, and soon we'll have an example with this character. So the first thing I want to do is just create a global control, which is basically going to be one object that sits at the base of the character's feet that I select as the main character object, and I can then select that object and move the full character in any direction, rotate her, scale her, whatever I want to do. So for that, I want to use the square. So I'm going to duplicate that, hitting Control D, middle mouse dragging it out of the group. And you'll see, like I said, translate X has changed to -10, so I'm going to change that back to 10, or back to 0. That puts that right at my base here. The pivot is perfectly centered, right there. Objects are all frozen. And just the one thing to remember, every time that you attach one of these, and you guys should remember this from class, before attaching it, you want to do a freeze all transformations on it. You want all of this stuff to be 0. You want this to be 1. Because basically, when you're animating, you don't want to have to go back and be like, all right, what was my bind pose again? I think it was 19, -4, -8. I can't remember, though. You want it to just be something easy, like 0. So freezing transformations will set every attribute to 0, no matter where it is in world space. So, what I want to do now is basically parent everything underneath of this. So I'm going to select my joint chain, starting with JRoot and my IK group. And then finally I'm going to end with Control Square. I'm going to hit P. And now you can see when I drag and click over this, I select everything. Let's name this Anim Global. We're doing the prefix of anim because it's basically every control object that's the only thing that you should be animating in a scene. So with a good rig, you should never be animating joints or anything else. It should just be your controls for a character. Obviously for hard surface animation, stuff like that, you might have different setups. But for this type of rig that we're doing, this is how we want to set it up. So let's take a look. Let's make sure it's working. So you can see I have the character skin now too. So the whole rig is moving around with it. If I turn on 4, you can see that. But again, I can reset it all to 0. You know, if I wanted, I can do this. I could rotate it, scale it, do whatever I want. But at any time, I can be like, you know, I just don't like this initial setup. Okay, well, let's just drag over all this and click 0. The problem is I did scale, so I need to do scale of 1. And there we go. We're all set. So I'm going to save this again. I had saved it as version 6 off camera. But that's good. So next thing we want, we're just going to work our way up the middle of the body. So let's take a look. The next thing that we want to do is going to be our pelvis. We want something that can control this motion for us. So let's use the square for that. I'm going to do the cube, I'm sorry. So let's duplicate that. Let's move it out of the group here. And let's call it Anim Pelvis for now. We're set our translate to 0, and let's go to our front view and just snap this holding V up to our pelvis bone. Let's just zoom in, make sure we've got it. And let's look at the right side to make sure we've got it on both axes. Alright. So that looks good. Select that and select that. Looks like the pivot does not change. So next thing I want to do is change the scale But I'm going to do that by actually selecting control vertices. This is pretty much the same thing as a vertex in poly modeling. So just we want to drag over these. We don't want to click, because clicking will just select the top one. And as we saw when we were making this, we had multiple control vertices stacked on top of each other. So this dragging allows us to select everything. And I want to work in a mirrored fashion, so I'm selecting both at a time and just using scale. I'm going to do this axis first and just scale it out. I want it to be something that's easy to select. And I'm going to be putting a control object on this bone too, or on this joint. So I want to move this down a little bit so I have a little space to put one in here. But there's really nothing else that's going to go down here except for a pole vector for our knees. So I think something like this is probably pretty good. Let's look at our side view. And let's just drag these out a little bit from the side. This one's going to get tricky because the IK handle will actually override my selection. So I had to get in close. Let's get the top one and then the bottom. Alright, so there we go. Go back to object mode, and now you see we have a really easy to grab piece right here in the middle. Currently it is not doing anything, so let's first freeze transformations on this. Freezing all of them. And for this, we want to select the control object first, and then the object that we want to control, because we're going to be using constraints for this now, not parenting. Parenting would be the opposite, so it's kind of annoying that they did it that way, but that's just how it is, so just got to remember. It's also not a big deal. If you get it backwards, you can always just, I do that all the time, you just redo it and just do it in the opposite direction. So anyway, we'll select our control object first, and then our pelvis. Remember, we can select the pelvis kind of by selecting the bone that's leading out of it. We can check here that it's right here. Let's check our skeleton. Yes, we have pelvis selected. So next thing we want to do is go up to the constrain menu, and we'll go to orient. If I reset my settings, you'll notice that maintain offset gets unchecked. So this is one of the biggest, easiest mistakes to make, is to forget to use the options box and check maintain offset. Basically, if you leave it unchecked, it will move things around. So we want basically everything to be, just because there's slight values for joints and different things like that. So anyway, just make sure that you have this checked and it'll work. So we'll click add, and then if we click off of everything and then select this, we see that things turn purple again. And let's take a look, and it seems to be working just fine. So that's great. Again, this is why we have 0, so I can just type 0 in. And I'm going to save it there. And let's see. So I'm also going to do kind of a box like this for the chest. So therefore, I'm actually just going to use the circle to do this middle object here. So let's grab that. I just want something flat and easy to grab that kind of fits. So let's duplicate that. We'll move it up out of the group. Sometimes you might accidentally drag it into another group. Just be careful. Just drag it back out. No big deal. Call this one anim back. Set our translate to 0. Let's go to our front view. And we'll just snap it up, just like before. And go to the right view, make sure that we have it snapped in every axis. We seem to. So, let's see, the scale of this one's already pretty good. Scale it down just a little bit so it doesn't intersect the arms at all. Let's just freeze all of our transformations on that. I think I missed it. Okay. And with that selected, we're just going to select the back now and constrain, orient. It should be the same settings. I'll check anyway, but it is. Yep. Okay, so let's just test it out. Yep. Seems to be working just fine. And lastly, let's do our chest. I'm going to use another box for this one. So let's select the cube, duplicate, middle mouse drag, call it anim chest. You can also call it torso. That might be more appropriate or make more sense to you. Whatever you want to do. And let's snap that up to our chest bone or joint, whatever you want to call it. Make sure that's snapped on both axes. It's a little more confusing from this angle, so let's take a look from perspective. There we go. That looks pretty good. Alright, so I'm going to want another custom shape on this. So this one's kind of complicated because we've got this giant scarf. So I'm going to scale it way up real quick. And let's move it down. And I'm going to kind of counter the angle of this one. Let's see if that is outside. Yeah, that's pretty good. So just want to scale it down a little bit more. It's going to intersect the arms. None of that really matters. It's all just visual representation. The main thing is that we just have the ability to have something that we can select that has these attributes. So let's freeze these transformations. And let's, with this selected, we're going to select... sometimes I hit W just to select the translate icon, because sometimes you try to select in here, this overrides the selection. So translate gives you a better grab on those things. So let's do constrain, orient, maintain offset, and add. Alright, let's see how that looks. Alright, that looks pretty good. So one thing that you might notice is that you could very easily accidentally scale things, which you don't want to do, or move things. Now, we don't have the type of constraint on this that it'll mess that up, but it's going to put it out of place, which is going to mess up our pivot. So to protect against that, did I not freeze? Oh, I thought I froze transformations on this. All right, I did not, so I'm undoing this. I think I did in a different practice session. All right. Maybe I undid it right before. All right, well, anyway, freeze transformations on that. Let's just redo it. Strain, orient. So, yeah, there we go. All set. All right. So, all three of these are orient constraints. So we can actually shift select all of these. And then I'm going to control select every one of these attributes here that we don't want, which will be translate and scale. And we're just going to hide and lock these, because we're never going to use them. We don't want the animator to come in and accidentally move this way out of the way. Because, like I was saying, if I moved this and then the pivot is up here, when I do a rotation, it's going to screw everything up, and it's just going to be really confusing to look at. So that's looking pretty good. So next thing that I want to do, and I'm going to do this a couple more times, but just to start, well, how about I'll finish the whole head chain first, or the whole body chain, and then we'll do the parenting. So next up, I want another circle. Duplicate that. Just hitting F. You can actually hit F over here, and it'll actually focus on the object you have selected too, which is kind of handy. Just like hitting F, we'll do the same thing over here. So let's middle mouse drag this up here. Call this anim neck. Set this to 0. And let's look for that neck in there. So this might get a little funky with our... Yeah. Trying to think of the best way to do this. So I can come in and actually adjust the control vertices on these. So I'm going to do that because this is a component adjustment that I'm making. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Component adjustments do not affect the overall translate attributes, so you can actually come in after and change these shapes. The thing is that I want to snap my neck right here, and right now that would intersect with this, so that could be kind of confusing. So I'm going to move that down, and I think I like that. So you can see doing that component adjustment doesn't change anything on the object. Pivot is still there, it still works. So let's select this circle, and let's scale that up so we can see it. So it's a little overkill on her. We probably don't need all this because we have this scarf that's kind of blocking everything. But, yeah, we're going to do it anyway just to show you how to do it. So I'm holding V down, snapping it on that axis. Let's make sure it's still snapped on the front and that we can see it. Looks pretty good. So next, of course, is freeze transformations. And then we want to select the neck and do another orient constraint. And there we go. Now we have head rotation. Finally, or neck rotation. So we want to create a duplicate on this, or not a duplicate, but you know, we have one more that we want for the head, just to give us a little bit more control over the head, because the neck is pretty complicated as an object. So this, let's just do it just like we did on the face. Let's hit duplicate. Let's move it on out of here. Call this one anim head. And just snap it on up here to the head, somewhere around there. And well, we know that x is going to be 0. And let's see. Just holding V as always. Make sure we get it right in there on the head. So for this one, we're going to do a little bit of an offset. So let's do a negative 90-degree rotation a little here. Let's move it up a little. So we have it outside of the head like this. And the problem now, of course, is that our pivot is kind of off-center. So let's move this back down just so it's around the whole head. And I'm going to now hold, from the right view, I'll hold D, which allows me to move my pivot, as you can see. And then V to snap down to the head. And there we go. So now that object is centered. The most important thing is that the pivot of your control object is set exactly to the pivot of the bone. So it currently is. So freezing transformations on this now. Select the head. It will constrain, orient constrain this. And let's test it out. A little bit of extra neck. Okay, looks good. So one thing that you might notice now as you rotate this is as you add more controls on top, the top bones kind of stop moving along with it, and that's because each of these bones now is constrained to the next object above it. So this can be a problem because, you know, now when I rotate the head forward, well, maybe I wanted the neck, you know, the neck should drive the whole head down, but it doesn't because this pivot is still being held in place, or this joint is still being held in place by this object. So what we're going to want to do is kind of parent all the way down through here. So basically every one of these things above will be a child of the thing below it. Because we want to be, with the exception of the pelvis we're going to leave kind of on its own. But we want to start with the back up to the chest. So let's see, for this we want to go backwards, right? I'm just checking. So hit P. Yeah. No, sorry, other way around. Select this first. Hit P. Wait. There we go. Yeah. So select the bottom one first. That's going to be the child. And then... Man, did I just get it wrong again? It's the top one that's going to be the child. This shouldn't be that complicated. Yeah. Okay, there. That's what we want. So then I'm just selecting this one. So yeah, so as we go down, we want to see them all stay selected, basically. So now if I rotate this, the whole thing goes with it. And I can always counter-rotate, but now it's more natural, and everything sticks with the body. Again, the hips are kind of their own thing, so we're just going to leave that alone. We are going to make a center of gravity kind of thing now that we're going to put behind it. So for this one, you could make a custom shape. I think in class I made a C. Let's do that again. And I got that from a guy on Digital Tutors. He did it that way. I thought that was kind of a nice way to do it. I don't want to make it sound like I've invented all of these things. I'm just teaching you guys how to do them. So yeah, I think that'll be the last one, and then we'll have our full center of gravity, or our full central core kind of controlled up. So, actually, before we go any further, let's do a quick group on this. We'll just call this controls. I'm going to move it above. This is just for visual purposes. I'm just keeping my base control at the bottom. Alright, so let's go to our front view. We'll grab our control, create CV tool again, and I'm just going to hold V, or I'm going to hold X to snap to pivot, and just make a letter C here, and hit enter. So you can see our pivot is over here. So let's first start by centering our pivot by going to modify, center pivot, and let's snap this to 0, 0, 0, and we're going to want to constrain this one to the root. So this one's going to be a little bit weirder from the rest because we're actually going to move it. It's kind of going to be similar to the head where we really move our pivot around quite a bit. let's move this to our root. Make sure it's still right on the center. Yes, it is. Let's freeze transformations on this real quick. We're still going to move it back. We're going to have to freeze one more time. We're going to move it back a little bit. I'm actually going to move it up. So this is basically, we have this control to select the whole body. This is basically going to give us the control to select the entire top of the body and rotate that. It's the same, essentially, as grabbing the whole root. So it pretty much actually selects the entire body, just the joint structure, though. So now that we have this back here, let's go to the right side. We're going to do our D trick again, and hold D down to move the pivot. Snap it down. Just get it close, and then we can zoom in, and just make sure that we keep holding D. And D and V to snap to our root. So that should be there. I'm going to select my root just to see. Yeah. So the pivot we saw did not move at all when we selected that. So now I want to freeze transformations on this. Freeze all transformations, and now this object is exactly where I want it to be. So with that object selected, now I'm going to select the root joint. And for this one, I am actually going to do a parent constraint. I don't want to parent it because I don't want the control inside of my joint structure. But I'm going to do so. Basically, a parent constraint does the same thing as parenting, but it leaves it outside of the visual hierarchy in the outliner. So we're going to do a parent, maintain offset is on, and leave everything else default. So we can see what a parent constraint does just by looking at the joint here. Is everything has gone blue here except for scale. So that basically constrains translate and rotate. And this light blue object means that that current thing is being driven by something else. So now I can select this and move it up and down, and I can rotate it. But you'll notice, even though this gives me some pretty funny animation, it's still not driving everything else. So we need to add this to our parent system. And so select that last and hit P. And now we rotate, it moves the whole body with it. And yep, that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to hit save on this, and I think that about wraps it up for this video. I know that was kind of long, but yeah, this takes a little bit of time to do. The main thing is just being careful, remembering to freeze transformations, and making sure that you parent things in the right order. As you saw, I mean, I messed that up, and it's just really easy to go, because I had gotten in the mindset of doing constraints, which is to select the object, then the constraint. But in this case, for parenting, you want to select the child, then the parent, and then hit P. But you can always undo it and just redo it in the other direction if you get mixed up. So I'm going to save it here and cut it off. And next we are going to do the arms and legs.